A decades-old catalog listing reignites a Philadelphia cold case. A single pendant, engraved for ET 1982, matches a custom piece stolen in a flawless pre-dawn raid. In that instant, a vanished night guard named Jerome Tate becomes the key to unraveling. 1.8 million in missing jewel sand. A man living under a false name in rural Ohio is unmasked. Before the first rumble of traffic, Sansom Street lay deserted beneath a ribbon of sodium vapor light. Storefronts stood like hushed sentinels as the city's pulse slowed to a whisper. Inside the Philadelphia Jewelry Exchange, the polished marble floor reflected the cool glow of emergency lights, the only illumination left when the main power had gone dark. A single red LED blinked on a motion detector perched above the vaulted glass cases, dutifully scanning for movement in the empty showroom. Just before 4:00 a.m., a faint hum traced along the ceiling rafters the soft whir of a maintenance fan long scheduled for replacement. No alarm siren pierced the silence, no security guard paced the hallway. The exchange's central panel, tucked into a locked cabinet off the loading dock, had gone offline days earlier for routine rewiring. In that brief window, the alarm relay sat dormant, its connections severed by gloved hands who knew exactly where to look. In the heart of the showroom, the security drawer and armored steel box built into a reinforced wall waited, as it always did. Vendors trusted it with their most valuable goods through the night: diamond studs, heirloom watches, and delicate filigree necklaces. The drawer's lock was designed to withstand prolonged force, but only when its electronic latch was live. Tonight, it swung open with the quiet click of a master key. Beyond the display cases, a narrow corridor led to the loading bay. The culprits moved with practiced precision, their footsteps muffled by thick rubber soles. They carried discreet cases, engineered for shock absorption, lined in velvet to cradle fragile stones. No lights flickered on, no motion sensors tripped outside the immediate perimeter. It was as if someone had paused time. By 4:17 a.m., the thieves had exfiltrated over 1.8 million in diamonds, cash, and vintage gold pieces drawn from at least 10 individual vendors. They left behind empty trays and one single witness, the motion detector blinking its unheeded warning. A silent sentinel rendered impotent by the absence of electricity. When the backup generator finally engaged 45 seconds later, the showroom lurched into stark brilliance. The steel drawer lay open, its contents vanished, and every glass case sat undisturbed but bare. A solitary alarm chime echoed through the ducts, announcing the breach with clinical precision. Seconds later, the local patrol unit's radios crackled to life. Outside, the early morning calm returned to Sansom Street as officers sealed off the exchange's front entrance. Yellow tape fluttered in the cold breeze while uniformed detectives slipped inside, clipboards in hand. They photographed the empty drawer, sketched the untouched locks, and logged the tripped sensor as Exhibit A. No broken glass, no footprints, no clear path for escape. In the flickering light of dawn, the showroom looked frozen in time like a tableau waiting for its story to be told. But the missing treasures were gone forever, spirited away by hands as invisible as the silence they left behind. In the moments before the generator roared the showroom back to life, the heist had already reached its apex of precision. From the service corridor, two figures advanced toward the central security panel, their movements choreographed to the second. Gloved fingers slid the panel's cover aside, exposing a nest of wiring that controlled every alarm, sensor, and electric lock in the exchange. Within 15 seconds, the main relay had been shorted, and bypassed act so clean it left no scorch marks, only the faint hum of interrupted current. Meanwhile, on the mezzanine level, a third operative detached the motion detector's backup battery. Its red LED continued to pulse, oblivious to the absence of power, dutifully recording each scan in silent logs stored deep within the building's network. No audible cue signaled its dormancy. Only the heist team's handheld scanner registered the fault. By 5 a.m., they reached the reinforced steel drawer that housed the highest value consignments, a bulwark of solid metal and electronic locking mechanisms. The lead technician inserted a CNC cut key blank and, within 6 seconds, replicated the proprietary bidding tolerances required for release. Another click, and the drawer slid outward, exposing velvet-lined compartments that cradled loose diamonds, high-carat chains, and antique pocket watches whose market value far exceeded their weight in gold. Inside the display aisles below, 2 more accomplices moved methodically, a jewelry-trained eye guiding long-handled trays beneath the cases. They lifted each item with padded gloves, placing them into custom-molded carriers that negated any friction or risk of damage. Not a single case was shattered. The locking pins had never been forced. It was the difference between theft and looting, an operation executed with the delicacy of a surgeon's incision. From the loading bay, an exterior lookout signaled the departure route. A nondescript van idled in the alley's shadow, its engine ticking gently against the autumn chill. Within 30 seconds of the drawer's opening, 5 crates, each pre-numbered and labeled by vendor, were loaded into the cargo hold. Blank license plates, swapped en route, bore no record of origin. At precisely 4:17 a.m., the final courier slipped the drawer's electronic latch back into place, reactivating the relay and resealing the panel as though undisturbed. When the backup generator engaged at 4:17:45, the showroom was bathed in stark fluorescent light, every glass case intact but conspicuously empty. The van melted back into the sleeping streets of Center City, leaving only the faint echo of its tires on pavement and a single tripped motion sensor to bear witness. By sunrise, the Philadelphia Jewelry Exchange would be abuzz with questions. How had someone circumvented a state-of-the-art security network? How could an entire cache of multi-million-dollar inventory vanish without a trace? But in the hush of dawn, only one fact was certain. This was no random smash and grab. It was a silent masterpiece of criminal engineering, one that would baffle investigators for years to come. Jerome Tate had worked the night shift at the Philadelphia Jewelry Exchange for nearly 5 years. Standing 6 feet tall with steady hands and a careful eye, he was known for his quiet professionalism and his spotless record. Each evening he would pass through the front turnstile just after 9:00 p.m., log in at the security desk, and begin his rounds beneath the showroom's low-ceilinged corridors. He carried an antiquated flashlight in one hand, a clipboard in the other, ticking off motion sensors, door alarms, and the hum of backup generators. On the morning of October 12, 1986, Tate completed his final inspection at 3:45 a.m. He tapped the last sensor to confirm functionality and radioed the control room with his standard report. All clear, room 3. The central panel registered his check-in, but when he turned to leave, the hallway behind him lay awash in darkness. He paused at the doorway, frowned, and stepped back inside his silhouette, caught for a heartbeat in the beam of a resetting light. Then he was gone. By 4:20 a.m., when the backup lights roared to life, the exchange's managers discovered the heist in progress and summoned Tate via radio. Their calls went unanswered. His station was empty. His flashlight lay atop the desk, its beam still focused on a section of floor tiley an odd angle for a guard to have left it paused. His clipboard fluttered open, the last entry blank past 3:45 a.m. Security logs showed no outgoing radio traffic from Tate after his final routine check. His personal effects keys, watch, wallet, remained locked in his locker. Even his final paycheck, already printed, had not been collected. When detectives arrived, they found no sign of a struggle, no blood, no overturned chairs, no footprints beyond his own. The rear service door was latched but unlocked, as it always was after hours. Within hours, Jerome Tate became the prime suspect. Officers searched his apartment in North Philadelphia, rifling through drawers and unsealing boxes. They interviewed neighbors, who remembered only a polite, retiring tenant who left quietly each morning before dawn. Tate's car was still parked outside his building, the engine cold. Faced with mounting pressure, the police filed charges only to drop them days later for lack of evidence. On October 19, a week after the theft, Tate's disappearance was officially ruled a missing persons case. The city's newspapers ran photos of his deep-set eyes and mustache beneath the headline, "Night Guard Vanishes Amid 1.8 M Jewelry Heist." Headlines faded by November's end, and the photograph yellowed on bulletin boards. In the months that followed, investigators chased every rumor that Tate had fled in panic, that he'd been coerced by unseen accomplices, even that he'd perished in some unrecorded accident. But each lead frayed into static. Over time, Tate's name slipped from conversations, another ghost in the city's underbelly, whispered only when cold case detectives revisited old files. And so Jerome Tate became two things at once. The man accused and the man lost his fate, tangled in the same silence that cloaked the jewelry exchange on that frigid October dawn. By mid-October 1986, the Philadelphia Jewelry Exchange heist dominated local newsstands. Daily editions splashed grainy photos of empty display cases and the unclaimed steel drawer across front pages. Television crews hovered outside the exchange's iron gates, their spotlights piercing the darkness long after regular broadcast hours. Vendors granted solemn interviews, recounting the precise value of missing gemstones, estimating losses that, when tallied, eclipsed $1.8 million. Insurance adjusters arrived in corduroy jackets, briefcases in hand, to sift through inventories and catalog claims. Yet as autumn yielded to winter, the frenzy around the Sansom Street burglary began to wane. Headlines shrank from full-page spreads to perfunctory dispatches. The nightly news relegated the story to the 11:15 slot. By week 3, it landed only in the ticker crawl. In the exchange's lobby, the bulletin board where Tate's smiling mug had been tacked now held laminated advertisements for safe deposit rentals and new security features. A small "wanted" poster in the corner curled at the edges, its paper yellowed and ink fading. Insurance payments moved into escrow, and vendors adjusted to their upgraded lockboxes and infrared cameras. Some pressed for federal involvement, but U.S. Marshals, already stretched thin, deferred to local detectives. A prosecutor publicly criticized the exchange's oversight of its own security panel, but concrete action never followed. Instead, a new slate of crimes, robberies, kidnappings, corporate fraud pulled the city's attention away. Detective Raymond Lucas, lead investigator on the Tate file, felt the pull himself. He spent weeks conducting door-to-door inquiries in North Philadelphia, revisiting neighbors whose memories blurred with the passage of time. He subpoenaed banking records and monitored Tate's last known credit card transaction, but each thread unraveled into dead air. After 6 months, Lucas found himself drafting a memorandum to his superiors. The case was cold. In January 1987, Philadelphia's cold case unit filed Tate's file under unresolved thefts. Clerks stamped the folder, inactive, sliding it onto a back shelf with hundreds of similar dossiers. In that dim archive room, Tate's personnel file complete with a lone, unshipped paycheck rested beside blueprints of outdated alarm systems and carbon copy radio logs. The shelves groaned under the weight of untold mysteries, but Tate's name held a particular poignancy, a man suspended between innocence and guilt, neither exonerated nor condemned. By 1988, few in the exchange even remembered the scale of the loss. New security guards, young, hungry for overtime, referred only vaguely to that big diamond heist years ago. Conversations drifted to profit margins and supplier negotiations, not to the man who'd vanished into thin air. Even the building itself seemed to shrug off the past. Staff rewired the alarm panel and installed an opaque vault door, erasing the panel's compromised history. In the quiet hum of the reopened showroom, life resumed as normal. Jewelry glinted beneath fresh LED lights, clasped around customers' wrists, displayed in lockboxes once more. Silence reclaimed Sansom Street this time. not as a prelude to a crime, but as the default setting of a story half told, waiting for the next reader to turn the page. Detective Raymond Lucas returned to basement archives more times than he cared to count. The room was a tomb of yellowed folders, each one promising clues that never materialized. Under flickering fluorescent tubes, Lucas slid open the drawer marked Sansom St. Heist, Tate J., and removed Tate's personnel packet. The folder's edges were frayed, staples corroded by time. Inside lay photocopies of employment applications, background check clearances, and a single snapshot of Jerome Tate flashing a cautious smile in his night security uniform. Lucas spread the documents across a long oak table. He traced the timeline. July 1981, Tate hired on recommendation of a former guard. September 1984, a commendation for thwarting a vandalism attempt. February 1986, a routine promotion to shift supervisor. No disciplinary actions, no disciplinary notes. And then, just 3 weeks before October 12, 1986, an innocuous memo. Panel maintenance scheduled, 8/10. That memo loomed far larger now, suggesting inside knowledge that no external burglar could possess. He reached for the microfiche reader to review security camera schematics from the era. The blueprints showed a blind spot in the loading dock corridor, an area Tate had inspected personally each night. Had he logged that weakness, or had he exploited it? Lucas wasn't sure, and without archived footage, he'd never know. He summoned former co-workers for interviews, though most had long since retired or moved on. One former clerk remembered Tate's polished professionalism, while the maintenance technician recalled showing him how to bypass the panel relay during rewiring. He picked it up fast, the man had said. Too fast, in hindsight. Each recollection sharpened Lucas's suspicion, but offered no testimony admissible in court. Months turned into years. Case files multiplied as new cold cases demanded attention, but the Tate folder sat at the bottom of the pile, its pages undisturbed. Lucas drafted follow-up memos, requests for renewed fingerprint analysis, subpoenas for utility records, but each was met with bureaucratic delay. The forensics lab prioritized murder cases. The district attorney's office prioritized convictions. Paperwork languished in locked cabinets, annexes, and off-site storage. By 1990, Lucas was reassigned, and a new investigator inherited the file. Tate's name became an entry in an annual report. No further leads. Case remains unsolved. Under notes, a clerk added. Subject presumed deceased or living under alias. The notation was cautious and final, as if the man had already slipped through history's cracks. In that same archive room, a janitor passed between rows of shelving with a mop bucket, unaware of the human story folded within those folders. The dusty drawer hummed shut, erasing the momentary glare of overhead light. Jerome Tate's file returned to darkness's fate, as opaque as the closed vault doors at the exchange, and his name filed away as nothing more than a ghost in a cabinet of cold cases. In early April 2023, a slim, unassuming paperback auction catalog arrived at the mahogany desk of Cynthia Wells, assistant archivist for the Federal Art and Luxury Goods Recovery Program. At 29, Cynthia had made her reputation by spotting discrepancies in provenance records, an engraved date here, a mismatched hallmark there. That morning, she sifted through dozens of listings bound for an estate sale in rural Ohio, her coffee growing cold beside detailed black and white photographs. Page 47 jolted her upright. There, nestled between estate china and a tarnished silver tea set, was a diamond-studded pendant on a thin gold chain. The auctioneer's terse description read, Lot 112, Diamond Pendant. Inscribed for E.T. 1980. 2. Estate of Earl Talbot. Cynthia's heart quickened. She knew the significance of those initials and of that year. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the training session where an instructor had emphasized the importance of personalized engravings in tracing custom commissions for law enforcement records. She flipped open her laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard as she accessed the department's cold cases database. E.T. and 1982 summoned a single hit. A custom commission reported missing in the October 12, 1986 Sansom Street heist. The description matched almost exactly the same pear-shaped diamond surrounded by a halo of smaller stones, suspended on a 14-karat gold chain. Cynthia cross-referenced the lot photo with the old evidence catalog. The pendant's distinctive claw-prong settings were identical. Within minutes, she drafted an internal alert. Potential match to unrecovered item from 1986 Philadelphia Jewelry Exchange burglary. Item located in upcoming Ohio estate auction. Request freeze and seizure. Her supervisor, veteran archivist Martin Chow, approved the alert without hesitation. By mid-afternoon, the U.S. Marshal Service and FBI's art crime team were notified. In Washington, D.C., agents gathered around Cynthia's emailed photos, tracing the pendant's ornate design with gloved fingertips displayed on a large monitor. Fingerprint analysts reassured them that no usable prints remained on the piece after decades of handling. Any latent impressions would have degraded. But the engraving was incontrovertible. Back in Ohio, a regional U.S. Marshal contacted the local auction house. The manager, alerted just hours before the sale, agreed to postpone Lot 112's bid verbally and to hold any subsequent lots matching the tale of one man's quiet reinvention. Across the room, Cynthia watched through a secure video link as auction staff wrapped the pendant in acid-free tissue and placed it in an evidence tote. As the day ended, Cynthia allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. A 37-year-old cold case had awakened at the sight of one catalog image, proof that paper trails, even decades later, retained the power to topple false lives. In the dim light of her office, she saved her report and leaned back, aware that this single discovery would send ripples through old files and unearth a theft nearly swallowed by time. Within hours of securing the 4ET 1982 pendant, Cynthia Wells sat before a second screen, poring over digital scans of the 1986 Philadelphia theft report. The cold cases database held 9 detailed entries for unrecovered custom pieces, necklaces, brooches, cufflinks, each annotated with vendor lot numbers and scant photographs. She methodically matched shape, setting style, and engraving patterns against the Ohio catalog's remaining lots. Her first lead came quickly. Lot 117, described as a pair of Art Deco diamond cufflinks with nearly identical claw-prong mounts. A note in the original exchange inventory had identified those same cufflinks as missing from vendor -6's display tray. Cynthia highlighted the PDF annotation. The tiny hallmark on the cufflink hinge, visible only under magnification, was an unusual maker's mark traced to a single bespoke artisan. She flagged the entry and moved on. Across the room, Agent Lisa Morgan of the FBI's art crime team reviewed Cynthia's list. On a touchscreen whiteboard, they plotted each potential match, tracing arrows from archived evidence photos to estate catalog images. When Morgan panned into Lot 123, a vintage gold bracelet inscribed ET 1983, her eyebrows shot up. That exact year didn't appear in the 1986 report, but a handwritten margin note by Detective Lucas referenced a late commissioned bracelet delivered just months before the heist. Meanwhile, U.S. Marshal Corey Vargas queried pawn shop receipts from the late 1980s, cross-checking serial numbers and appraisal slips found within the exchange's vault ledger. He discovered that several items had passed through at least 2 intermediaries before vanishing from official records altogether. Cynthia overlaid these names on her spreadsheet, marking lots 119 and 126 an emerald-cut ring and a pair of diamond-set watches high priority. By midnight, 17 catalog lots had earned match stamps on Cynthia's printout. Each bore subtle hallmarks of the Sansom Street burglary, distinctive engraving styles, unique gem cuts, and, in 2 cases, fragments of original vendor tags still looped through clasps. Through a secure link, she sent the consolidated dossier to the U.S. Marshals Service's Ohio field office with an urgent recommendation: freeze all lots pending seizure. The following morning, Cynthia joined a teleconference with federal agents and exchange representatives. On her laptop screen, she advanced slide-by-slide dependents, cufflinks, bracelets each, overlaid with side-by-side evidence photos from 1,986 and the auction catalog. She highlighted matching laser-etched serials beneath clasps and the telltale wear patterns on high-carat links. Listeners scribbled notes. One exchange vendor murmured, "I remember those exact markings." In the hours that followed, U.S. Marshals executed vouchers on the flagged lots. Auction staff carefully removed 17 items each, sealed in evidence bags, and tagged with Sansom Street heist labels. Cynthia watched remotely as agents logged each piece's chain of custody. For the first time in 37 years, the collateral of a silent dawn raid began to surface, piece by piece, under the scrutiny of modern forensic methods. As the final lot was secured, Cynthia allowed herself a moment to exhales. The quiet precision of her cross-referencing had unlocked a decades-old trail. Yet she knew this was only the beginning. Unearthing the catalog was one victory, but unmasking the man behind the alias would require another layer of investigative rigor. In that pause, she already turned her mind toward the next chapter of discovery. By first light on April 5, 2023, a tactical convoy of U.S. Marshals and FBI agents rolled into the sleepy parking lot of Marigold Auction House in Perrysville, Ohio. Agent in charge Elaine Vega briefed her team in silhouettes against the rising sun, emphasizing speed and discretion. Under her lead, the art crime team, the same unit that had pored over Cynthia Wells's cross-referenced dossier, coordinated with local marshals to secure the premises before any curious bidders arrived. Inside the auction hall, staff were mid-setup for the day's lots when uniformed marshals filed through the front doors, badges raised. Auctioneer Bill Harper, mid-sweep of a mahogany podium, froze at the sight of black vests and tactical belts. Vega introduced herself, her tone calm but authoritative. "Good morning. We're here to execute seizure orders on 17 lots pending federal investigation. Please direct your staff to temporarily suspend all sales." Harper nodded, voice steady despite the adrenaline spike. He snapped, closed his auctioneer's robe, and summoned his floor manager over the house microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please hold your paddles. We have a brief intermission." The murmur of confusion rippled through the small crowd of early registrants. Meanwhile, 3 FBI agents moved methodically through display tables, guided by a laminated list of lot numbers extracted from Cynthia's report. Each item was photographed in situ, then carefully lifted by gloved hands and placed into pre-numbered evidence bags. Agent Lisa Morgan oversaw the process, using ultraviolet lamps to check for any residual fingerprints and logging serial numbers against original exchange inventory sheets. Backstage, Marshal Corey Vargas coordinated the chain of custody. He verified each bag's seal and affixed bar-coded tags that would track the items through transport to the FBI evidence warehouse in Cleveland. "Lot 112, pendant, confirmed," he called into his radio. "Lot 117, cufflinks, confirmed." With every scan, the digital ledger in Washington, D.C. updated in real time, ensuring no piece could slip through bureaucratic cracks. Outside the auction house, Cynthia Wells watched the seizure unfold via a secure video link. Her eyes tracked the pendant's journey from display case to evidence tote. A wave of relief washed over her as she saw the methodical care agents took, with each piece her discovery had catalyzed this operation, and now it was unfolding with military precision. By 8:30 a.m., all 17 flagged lots had been secured. Agents loaded them into a nondescript armored van parked discreetly at the rear exit. Harper, still in his robe, escorted Vega to the door, where she handed him a copy of the federal seizure warrant bearing a judge's signature. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said. He simply nodded, the morning's events already receding into his auction day routine. As the convoy departed, the empty tables glinted under the overhead lights, an uncanny stillness replacing the usual bustle. In the auction hall's eerie, calm documentation teams began turning over unflagged lots for further inspection, probing for additional matches. For Cynthia, Vega, and their fellow agents, the execution of seizure orders marked only the next step. The items were safe, but the man who had orchestrated their disappearance remained at large. The raid in Ohio had corralled stolen treasures, but it also spotlighted a deepening mystery. How had Jerome Tatalias Earl Talbot evaded detection for nearly 4 decades? The chase was far from over. Back at the FBI evidence warehouse in Cleveland, technicians removed the sealed evidence bags one by one, placing each item on a stainless steel examination table under cold white light. Among the recovered pieces was the diamond pendant lot 112, which bore no usable prints. But tucked into the Ziploc pouch was a small paper tag, faded but legible, "Estate of E. Talbot, Perrysville, OH." Agent Lisa Morgan traced that name through the Bureau's identity theft unit. Earl Talbot, she discovered, had lived on a 2-acre farm outside Perrysville for more than 30 years. Property records listed him as a retired machinist. Local obituaries noted his death just months earlier, at age 70. There was nothing to suggest a criminal past, no arrests, no liens, no outstanding warrants. Morgan forwarded the dossier to the FBI's latent prints section. There, Specialist David Nguyen ran Talbot's death certificate fingerprint card against the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS. Within hours, the system flagged a near-perfect match to prints collected from the Jewelry Exchange's central panel relay prints, previously unlinked in the cold case files. Jerome Tate, AFIS confirmed, and Earl Talbot were one and the same. In a conference room lit by a single overhead lamp, Morgan and U.S. Marshal Corey Vargas reviewed the AFIS report. "He reinvented himself completely," Vargas said, tracing Talbot's alias through driver license renewals and voter rolls. Each document bore a consistent set of fingerprints, but carried the Talbot name. He had to know that prints never change. Meanwhile, special agents in Perrysville executed a search warrant on Talbot's former farmhouse. In the tool shed out back, they discovered a false wallet's hinges warped from decades of infrequent use. Behind it lay dozens of velvet-lined trays mirroring the ones used in the exchange's steel drawer. There were appraisal slips from the late 1980s, a collection of brass master keys, and a spiral-bound notebook heavy with penciled entries. Back in Cleveland, Nguyen summarized the significance of the fingerprint match. "It establishes presence at the crime scene, but not necessarily culpability in the burglary. We'll need corroborating evidence." Morgan nodded. The false wall's contents and the notebook entries would supply it, but only after painstaking cataloging and cross-referencing with the original case files. As agents loaded the recovered trays into evidence lockers, Morgan reflected on the irony. A man once presumed dead under a fake name had left the very proof of his true identity, with every signature on a voter registration form, every fingerprint on a death certificate. Cecil Shaw, the chief archivist who trained Cynthia Wells, later remarked, "It's not the grand gestures that unravel these mysteries, but the small administrative traces we all leave behind." In that moment, the heist's silent architect stood, unmasked, and the quiet farmland of rural Ohio revealed itself as the unlikely vault for $1.8 million in stolen treasures. Yet in the hush of the warehouse, Agents knew this breakthrough was merely the threshold of justice. Next came the unraveling of decades of ledgers, contacts, and clandestine payments that sustained Jerome Tate's secret life. Agents approached the weathered tool shed with caution, aware that after decades of neglect, every surface could conceal evidence. The shed's interior was cluttered with rusted implements and paint cans, its floor littered with sawdust. In the far corner, FBI engineer Marcus Hale noticed an incongruous seam in the plywood wall, perfectly straight vertical line that didn't align with the stud spacing. He traced it with a gloved fingertip, then tapped the panel experimentally. The hollow thud resonated differently along one section. Hale retrieved a pry bar and eased it into the gap. A soft creak announced the panel's release, revealing a narrow crawl space behind the main wall. Inside lay a series of shallow shelves, each custom-built to cradle flat trays of jewelry. Illuminated by the beam of a handheld lamp, the shelves held over 30 velvet-lined cases, each stamped with vendor lot numbers from the 1,986 inventory. Agents moved in carefully. U.S. Marshal Corey Vargas photographed every step before gently sliding out the first tray. It held a row of diamond-tipped brooches identical in cut and cluster to those reported missing in the exchange's Exhibit B. Beside them, a faded appraisal slip dated December 1986 bore the Philadelphia Exchange's official stamp and a scribbled notation, PT. Behind the brooches, a pair of gold cufflinks displayed the same maker's mark traced in Cynthia Wells's files. As trays emerged, Agent Lisa Morgan noticed a spiral-bound notebook tucked on the lowest shelf. Its cover was creased, pages dog-eared. She opened to the first entry, dated October 15, 1986, 3 days after the heist. The handwriting was neat. Funds deposited, brokers paid. Subsequent entries spanned 6 years, each line recording dates, item descriptions, and numeric codes. Some entries read simply, wristwatch X2, 1187, BK, followed by payment figures. Tucked between pages was a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1986, bearing the headline, Tate Suspected in Jewelry Heist, and a photograph of Jerome Tate's security uniform ID. On the facing page, in familiar cursive, someone had scrawled, "They took the fall, but I took the stairs." The juxtaposition of clipping and handwritten defiance left agents momentarily silent. In that cramped space, the man who had vanished under a new name had memorialized his own legend. Morgan closed the notebook carefully, sealing each leaf within an evidence sleeve. Meanwhile, forensic technicians bagged the appraisal slips, noting vendor names, serial numbers, and the faint smudges of Talbot's fingerprints. Each slip formed a direct link between stolen goods and the clandestine liquidation network Jerome had cultivated. As the last tray was removed, agents surveyed the empty recescence, a covert vault, now a bare cavity. Outside the shed, sunlight filtered through budding leaves, casting patterns on the lawn. The discovery of the false wall transformed a quiet Ohio farm into the epicenter of a multi-decade investigation. Behind plywood and plaster, Jerome Tate's hidden archive lay exposed proof that even the most meticulous deceptions hinge on human error and the persistence of paper. And so, with velvet trays and scribbled ledgers in evidence lockers, the chapter of concealment closed, yielding its secrets to the relentless scrutiny of modern justice. In the sterile examination room of the FBI evidence warehouse, Agent Lisa Morgan laid the spiral-bound ledger atop a laminated evidence mat. Fluorescent lights glinted off the notebook's worn metal binding. Each open page revealed neat columns, dates in the left margin, item names and codes in the center, and dollar figures aligned flush on the right. Beneath a small stack of appraisal slips, penciled entries traced the flow of stolen goods into an underground economy. The first entry, after the 1986 heist, read simply, 10, 15, 86, loose diamonds, vendor 3, 72-0, paid. The next, dated October 22, noted Art Deco cufflinks, 9,500 BK. Here, BK recurred throughout, initials corresponding to an unknown broker. Morgan highlighted every instance of BK in a yellow digital overlay, then zoomed in on marginalia scrawled in ballpoint ink, awaiting next drop November. The terse notation suggested Jerome Taitier, his ghostwriter, kept tight control over scheduling and payments. Meanwhile, U.S. Marshal Corey Vargas collated the ledger's broker initials against a database of known fences and middlemen. MAST RC and LP appeared alongside BK, each tied to separate consignments. Vargas traced MJ to a small-time jeweler in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, whose public records showed only minimal transactions. Yet the ledger's November 1987 entry, timepiece X2, MJ 15,750 coincided with a New Jersey pawnshop appraisal for two identical watches. That overlap provided the first tangible lead beyond Cynthia Wells's catalog matches. Across the table, forensic accountant Dana Sykes ran the ledger's payment figures through pattern analysis software. She discovered a rhythm. Most disbursements fell within 30 days of the bulk of recovered items arriving at Talbot's farmhouse. That timing pointed to a deliberate liquidation strategy. Jerome Tate had sold his spoils slowly, avoiding spikes that would attract attention. Each broker received modest sums, masking the true scope of the heist beneath layers of low-dollar sales. In a corner of the room, Agent Morgan refolded a torn newspaper clipping found in the ledger's back pocket. She placed it under a document camera, magnifying the small print. Dealer pays record sum for antique watch. A faint, handwritten note in pencil pointed to the date. February 1989, and the initials RC. The notation hinted at a television appearance by a now-retired dealer, suggesting that Tate's network occasionally brush-stroked the edges of legitimacy. That evening, at the local field office, Morgan and Vargas convened a strategy meeting. On a magnetic whiteboard, they affixed color-coded index cards bearing broker initials and corresponding dates. Lines traced connections from Talbot's ledger to open Suppanasa spiderweb of contacts spanning Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Ohio. Each node represented a potential witness, someone who might recall a strange estate sale or an unexplained influx of cash 30 years earlier. As the meeting closed, Morgan took one last look at the ledger's final entry. 5/12/90, assorted trinkets, LP 6/200, completed. After that, the pages were blank. No notes on expenses or travel logs. No further attempt to account for the remaining unrecovered items. In the hush of the conference room, the officers recognized that Jerome Tate's quiet empire had unraveled precisely because he had documented every transaction. The broker's ledgerance, his instrument of concealment, had become the blueprint for his undoing. And so, with broker initials exposed and subplots emerging from penciled margins, the investigation shifted from artifact recovery to human pursuit, piecing together a clandestine network that, for decades, had borne the weight of a silent heist. With the broker's ledger decoded, agents shifted focus to the sprawling web that had carried Jerome Tate's spoils into the wider market. In the Philadelphia field office, Agent Lisa Morgan and U.S. Marshal Corey Vargas convened a map of the Mid-Atlantic region, its surface crisscrossed by colored string and pushpin markers. Each pin represented a broker, initial BK in Cherry Hill, MJ in Camden County, RC in Bucks County, and a trail extending as far as a modest pawn shop in Cincinnati, Ohio. Their first stop was the unassuming Cherry Hill and Haddonfield Trade District, where BK, the ledger's most frequent broker, had operated a small jewelry repair shop in the late 1980s. A retired shop assistant, now in her 70s, recalled a steady stream of unusual consignments. Art Deco rings with intricate filigree, diamond necklaces that bore no maker's marks, and cash payments in envelopes thicker than ordinary receipts. Her memory sharpened when shown an appraisal slip stamped October 1986 by the Philadelphia Exchange. She whispered, "Yes, I remember that stamp. We paid pennies on the dollar." That testimony triggered a series of subpoenas and interviews. In New Jersey court records, brokers MJ and RC appeared in forfeiture hearings for low-value watch transactions, each case quietly dismissed when the sellers failed to appear. By cross-referencing pawn shop ledgers and municipal recycling records, where scrap gold from unclaimed pledged items sometimes surfaced, investigators linked MJ's shop to multiple shipments of melted-down settings, suggesting that some stolen gems had never survived the fence's profit margins. Meanwhile, in Cincinnati, Marshall Vargas tracked down the now-closed Midwest Pawn Loan, once managed by an inconspicuous proprietor named Leroy Patterson. Bank statements from 1989 revealed a pattern, rounding deposits on 3 consecutive Fridays, always hovering around $15,000, coinciding with the ledger's MJ entries. Patterson's daughter, who inherited the company, produced faded deposit slips that matched the serial numbers scribbled in Tate's notebook margins. Back in Philadelphia, forensic accountants uncovered wire transfers from Ohio accounts to shell corporations set up in Panamasimal amounts masked as consulting fees. These payments corresponded with ledger entries for EP, another broker whose identity remained elusive. The pattern implied a multi-layered laundering scheme, local pawn shops feeding a mid-tier fence, who in turn funneled proceeds offshore to a final beneficiary. As interviews multiplied, a lamentable truth emerged. Many lower-tier brokers had died or disappeared, and records were incomplete or destroyed. Yet each testimony chipped away at the network's opacity. A former pawn shop clerk in Trenton produced a handwritten log of special consignment items for Mr. T, while an Ohio scrapyard owner recounted receiving a call in 1990 offering high-quality diamonds for recycling. By the end of the month, agents had documented more than 20 individual links between brokers, dealers, and laundering conduits. On a crisp spring morning, Vargas and Morgan presented their findings to the Justice Department's Organized Crime Division. A chronology of exchanges threaded through time and space, and a map of guilt stretching from Sansom Street to rural barns in Ohio. In that moment, the true scale of Tate's operation crystallized no longer a solitary heist, but a sustained enterprise woven into everyday commerce. The fencing network, once invisible, now lay exposed under the harsh glare of law enforcement scrutiny, its participants finally brought into the light they had long evaded. With the fencing network mapped, the investigation shifted from artifact recovery to financial forensics. In Philadelphia's U.S. Attorney's Office, forensic accountant Dana Sykes assembled a digital ledger of all known transactions tied to Jerome Tate's aliases. She coded each broker payment, auction seizure, pawn shop deposit, and offshore transfer into a timeline spanning 1986 to 1992. Patterns emerged, rhythmic disbursements, alternating between small cash deals and more substantial wire transfers designed to avoid regulatory scrutiny. Simultaneously, the FBI's art crime team revisited surviving case files from the late 1980s. They uncovered a buried folder in a Decatur, Georgia, detectives' archivanotes on a luxury jeweler who abruptly closed shop in 1989 under mysterious circumstances. Agents traced that dealer's records to a defunct LLC registered to E. Talbot, suggesting Tate's brokering circle extended beyond Pennsylvania and Ohio. In a phone interview, the jeweler's former accountant recalled months of unexplained cash inflows and a chilling warning. He insisted on strict confidentiality, no questions, no records. Meanwhile, U.S. Marshal Corey Vargas coordinated interviews with individuals once on the periphery of the scheme. A former forklift operator at an Easton jewelry warehouse remembered pallets of unmarked wooden crates arriving in 1,987 crates that did not match any shipping logs. He described how a trim man in a suit personally signed the inbound manifests before the pallets vanished into a locked vault never opened for inventory. Though the vault's blueprints identified it as part of the exchange's now decommissioned annex, the operating code had been changed weeks before the heist. Back at the evidence warehouse, Agent Lisa Morgan and Sykes met over stacks of bank statements and seized ledgers. They layered digital heat maps atop Geographic Information System (GIS) plots, revealing hot zones of suspicious activity. A cluster of pawn shops in Camden County, recurring deposit spikes at a Paynesville, Ohio credit union, and a single UPS store in Cherry Hill that handled multiple insured packages of jewelry. Each data point corroborated the ledger's entries, forming an unbroken timeline of criminal enterprise. In April 2024, the team presented its findings to a federal grand jury. Over 3 days of testimony, they detailed how Jerome Tate had orchestrated not only the 1,986 burglary, but a 6-year liquidation plan involving at least 50 intermediaries. Charts displayed the anatomy of each transaction triangles connecting vendor numbers, broker initials, and financial flows. Witnesses included retired pawnbrokers, bank compliance officers, and even the auctioneer who recalled the interrupted sale in Ohio. The grand jury's indictment, unsealed in June, charged Tate posthumously and named 18 surviving individuals as conspiratorsum facing charges of money laundering, others of accessory after the fact. Though Tate would never stand trial, the papers declared his deeds in precise legal terms, ensuring the man who once slipped through the cracks would be cataloged among criminal masterminds. As the courtroom emptied, Dana Sykes reflected on the quiet persistence of paper. The same spiral notebook once hidden behind a false wall had become the cornerstone of justice. In the sterile glow of courthouse lights, decades of deceit unraveled into a clear, linear narrative, from the silent heist at Sansom Street, through half-forgotten pawn shops, to an Ohio estate catalog and beyond. The silent enterprise had met its reckoning at last. Investigators descended on Perrysville in late May 2023, intent on piecing together the decades Jerome Tate alias Earl Talbot spent under his false identity. Agent Lisa Morgan and US.com Marshal Corey Vargas arrived at the modest farmhouse off County Road 12 just past dawn, their cars stirring roosters and early light. They carried search warrant copies and cameras, but the house itself offered few clues. Trimmed hedges, a fresh coat of pale, yellow paint, and wide front windows curtained shut. Their first interview was with Mildred Jenkins, Talbot's next-door neighbor for 25 years. Jenkins had known Talbot only as Earl, a polite widower who kept to himself. In her compact living room, she offered a pot of tea and a faded photograph, Talbot standing beside her husband at a church picnic in 1995. He was friendly enough, Jenkins recalled, voice soft. Always asked after my roses. She paused over the photo, tapping the back where Talbot had scrawled in neat block letters, E. Talbot, May 95. It was the earliest personal memento agents had found proof that he cultivated normalcy even as he housed stolen fortunes. Next, Morgan and Vargas visited Reverend Samuel Price, pastor of Perrysville Community Church, where Talbot had quietly attended services each Sunday. In a vaulted ceiling office lined with hymnals, Price produced a small ledger listing church contributions. Beginning in 1988, Earl T. appeared almost every month, tithes deposited under cash. He never sought recognition, the pastor said, flipping to a 2002 entry annotated, "In memory of Jean Talbot," indicating Talbot's wife had died in a car accident just months after his move to Perrysville. The notation added emotional depth to a man otherwise known only through fingerprints and illicit ledgers. Further down County Road 12, The real estate agent who had brokered Talbot's farm sale now, retired, remembered the transaction vividly. In his sunlit den, he retrieved the original deed file. Talbot purchased 2.1 acres on October 30, 1987, for $42,500 cash. The closing statement bore no mortgage, no loan paperwork, just Talbot's signature and a cashier's check drawn on an out-of-state bank. That was odd even then, the agent admitted, but he explained it as rental income. The document's crisp typeface and Talbot's confident signature underscored how seamlessly he'd woven his backstory. Piecing these accounts together, agents compiled a timeline of Talbot's civilian life: church picnics, garden parties, friendly waves at the mailbox. Each recollection contradicted the notion of a reclusive criminal. Yet beneath the surface lay a hidden archive: the false wall of trays, the penciled notebook, the offshore transfers. That evening, in the makeshift command post set up in the local sheriff's office, Morgan reviewed the day's interviews. She overlaid Jenkins' photograph, the church ledger, and the deed file against the spiral notebook's entries. The juxtaposition was stark. A man who had mastered the art of normalcy to conceal years of theft. In those quiet testimonies, roses, tithes, cash purchases, investigators saw not only evidence of false identity, but the emotional stakes Talbot had navigated: loss, solitude, and the relentless drive to remain unseen. As dusk fell, Morgan and Vargas stepped outside the sheriff's office. The road stretched into the Ohio hills, silent and unassuming, much like the life Talbot had led. They knew the evidence trail was now complete, from silent vaults to church pews, from forged signatures to genuine grief. The chapters of Earl Talbot's quiet life had been laid bare, each witness adding human texture to a decades-old deception. In a federal courtroom in Philadelphia on June 12, 2024, proceedings commenced before Judge Marianne Delgado. The gallery, filled with insurance representatives, original vendors, and a handful of journalists, sat hushed as Assistant U.S. Attorney Graham Ford summarized the 6-year investigation. On the bench, prosecutors displayed recovered artifact scufflinks, pendants, brooch each mounted in clear evidence frames. Behind the gallery, vendors who had lived with loss for nearly 4 decades watched as their long-missing treasures stood testament to tenacity. Ford spoke with measured cadence, recounting the moment a simple estate catalog triggered the recovery of 17 items, then cataloging the expansion of seizures across Ohio, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. He detailed the fingerprint match, linking Jerome Tate to Earl Talbot, and the discovery of the false Walla covert vault that bore silent witness to illicit gain. Though Mr. Tate died under his alias, Ford intoned, his estate and those complicit in concealing his spoils will answer for decades of deceit. No defendants appeared for Tate himself, but 18 surviving brokers and fences were arraigned on charges ranging from money laundering to accessory after the fact. Several entered guilty pleas. A former Cherry Hill pawnbroker admitted to knowingly accepting stolen goods, while a New Jersey jeweler acknowledged 3 separate wire transfers traced back to Talbot's offshore accounts. Judge Delgado accepted plea agreements that included restitution orders totaling over $2.3 million, covering both the original $1.8 million in losses and accrued interest. In the crowd, Cynthia Wells watched from the back row, her notebook open on her lap. She felt a quiet vindication. Each sentence of the indictment validated her belief in the power of documentation and archival diligence. Beside her sat Detective Raymond Lucas, retired but invited in recognition of his early efforts. He tapped her shoulder during a recess and offered a rare smile. "You picked up the thread we lost so long ago," he whispered. Outside the courthouse, vendors reunited with their recovered pieces under strict chain of custody protocols. Diamond maker Harrison Leung cradled a custom brooch long thought melted down. "I never believed I'd see this again," he said, voice catching as he slipped the pin back onto his lapel. Insurance adjusters settled final claims, and a formal restitution fund was established to compensate collectors whose items remained missing. Meanwhile, in rural Ohio, Talbot's farmhouse was auctioned under court order. Workers dismantled the false wall, recovering the last trays and the incriminating ledger for display in a temporary traveling exhibit on cold case recoveries. Local historical societies expressed interest, recognizing the story's blend of small-town life and grand deception. By year's end, media retrospectives framed the case as proof that meticulous record-keeping and the patience to follow a single catalog entry could topple even the most carefully constructed false identity. In his final order, Judge Delgado wrote, "This case stands as a reminder that time may obscure wrongdoing, but it cannot erase evidence." As June's summer heat settled over Philadelphia, the quiet persistence of truth prevailed. Jerome Tate's name, once tarnished by suspicion and shadowed by disappearance, was restored to the annals of justice, his silent heist laid bare for future generations to study. And in the hush of museum corridors and courtroom echoes, the recovered gems gleamed as emblems of resolution, their journey from dark vaults to open display, a testament to justice's long arc.